Hello UT, Mr. Mellon here again for some English today, and we're going to be looking at identifying and applying grammatical features today. Sounds a bit complicated, but we're going to be looking at different types of sentence, and we're also going to be using coordinating and subordinating conjunctions to complete sentences. But first of all, we're going to read the rest of George's Marvellous Medicine, and after that we're going to have a go at the 2 tasks on your task sheet. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the rest of the story. Marvellous Medicine number 3. Here it is, cried Mr. Cranky, rushing into the kitchen. 1 carton of flea powder for dogs and 1 can of brown shoe polish. George poured the flea powder into a giant stewing pot. Then he scooped the shoe polish out of its can and added that as well. Stir it up, George, shouted Mr. Cranky. Give it another boil. We got it this time. I'll bet we got it. After Marvellous Medicine number 3 had been boiled and stirred, George took a cupful of it out into the yard to try it on another chicken. Mr. Cranky ran after him, flapping his arms and hopping with excitement. Come and watch this one, he called out to Mrs. Cranky. Come and watch us turning an ordinary chicken into a lovely great big one that lays eggs as large as footballs. I hope you do better than last time, said Mrs. Cranky, following him out. Come on, chicken, said George, holding out a spoonful of medicine number 3. Good, chicken. Chick, 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 chick. Have some of this lovely medicine. A magnificent black cockerel with a scarlet comb came stepping over. The cockerel looked at the spoon, and it went peck. Cock-a-doodle-doo, squawked the cockerel, shooting up into the air and coming down again. Watch him now, cried Mr. Cranky. Watch him grow. Any moment he's going to start getting bigger and bigger. Mr. Cranky, Mrs. Cranky, and little George stood in the yard staring at the black cockerel. The cockerel stood quite still. It looked as though it had a headache. What's happening to its neck? Mrs. Cranky said. It's getting longer, George said. I'll say it's getting longer, Mrs. Cranky said. Mr. Cranky, for once, said nothing. Last time it was the legs, Mrs. Cranky said. Now it's the neck. Who wants a chicken with a long neck? You can't eat a chicken's neck. It was an extraordinary sight. The cockerel's body hadn't grown at all, but the neck was now about 6 feet long. All right, George, Mr. Cranky said. What else have you forgotten? I don't know, George said. Oh, yes, you do, Mr. Cranky said. Come on, boy, think. There's probably just one vital thing missing, and you've got to remember it. I put in some engine oil from the garage, George said. Did you have that on your list? Eureka! Cried Mr. Cranky. That's the answer. How much did you put in? 1/2 pint, George said. Mr. Cranky ran to the garage and found another 1/2 pint of oil. And some antifreeze, George called after him. I sloshed in a bit of antifreeze. Marvellous Medicine number 4. Back in the kitchen once again, George, with Mr. Cranky watching him anxiously, tipped 1/2 pint of engine oil and some antifreeze into the giant stewing pot. Boil it up again, cried Mr. Cranky. Boil it and stir it. George boiled it and stirred it. You'll never get it right, said Mrs. Cranky. Don't forget, you don't just have to have the same things, you've got to have exactly the same amounts of those things. And how can you possibly do that? You keep out of this, cried Mr. Cranky. We're doing fine. We got it this time. You see if we haven't. This was George's Marvellous Medicine number 4, and when it had boiled for a couple of minutes, George once again carried a cupful of it into the yard. Mr. Cranky ran after him. Mrs. Cranky followed more slowly. You're going to have some mighty strange chickens around here if you go on like this, she said. Dish it out, George, cried Mr. Cranky. Give a spoonful to that one over there. He pointed to a brown hen. George knelt down and held out the spoon with the new medicine in it. Chick, chick, he said. Try some of this. The brown hen walked over and looked at the spoon. Then it went peck. Ouch, it said. Then a funny whistling noise came out of its beak. Watch it grow, shouted Mr. Cranky. Don't be too sure, said Mrs. Cranky. Why is it whistling like that? Keep quiet, woman, cried Mr. Cranky. Give it a chance. They stood there staring at the brown hen. It's getting smaller, George said. Look at it, Dad. It's shrinking. And indeed it was. In less than a minute the hen had shrunk so much it was no bigger than a new hatched chick. Goodbye, Grandma. There's still something you've left out, Mr. Cranky said. I can't think what it could be, George said. Oh, give it up, Mrs. Cranky said. Pack it in. You'll never get it right. Mr. Cranky looked very forlorn. George looked pretty fed up too. He was still kneeling on the ground with a spoon in one hand and a cup full of medicine in the other. The ridiculous tiny brown hen was walking slowly away. At that point, Grandma came striding into the yard. From her enormous height, she glared down at the three people below her and shouted, "What's going on around here? Why hasn't anyone brought me my morning cup of tea? It's bad enough having to sleep in the yard with the rats and mice, but I'll be blowed if I'm going to starve as well. No tea, no eggs and bacon, no buttered toast." "I'm sorry, Mother," Mrs. Cranky said. "We've been terribly busy. I'll get you something right away." "Let George get it, the lazy little brute," Grandma shouted. Just then the old woman spotted the cup in George's hand. She bent down and peered into it. She saw that it was full of brown liquid. It looked very much like tea. "Oh," she cried, "ha! So that's your little game, is it? You look after yourself, all right, don't you?" "No, Grandma," George said. "This isn't—" "Don't lie to me, boy," the enormous old hag shouted. "Pass it up here this minute." "No," cried Mrs. Cranky. "No, Mother, don't, that's not for you." "Now you're against me too," shouted Grandma. "My own daughter trying to stop me having my breakfast, trying to starve me out." Mr. Cranky looked up at the horrid old woman and smiled sweetly. "Course it's for you, Grandma," he said. "You take it and drink it while it's nice and hot." "Don't think I won't," Grandma said, bending down from her great height and reaching out a huge horny hand for the cup. "Hand it over, George." "No, no, Grandma," George cried out, pulling the cup away. "You mustn't. You're not to have it." "Give it to me, boy," yelled Grandma. "Don't," cried Mrs. Cranky. "That's George's marvellous—" "Everything's George's around here," shouted Grandma. "George is this, George is that. I'm fed up with it." She snatched the cup out of little George's hand and carried it high up out of reach. "Drink it up, Grandma," Mr. Cranky said, grinning hugely. "Lovely tea." "No, no," the other two cried. "No, no, 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 no." But it was too late. The ancient beanpole had already put the cup to her lips, and in one gulp she swallowed everything that was in it. "Mother," wailed Mrs. Cranky, "you've just drunk 50 doses of George's marvellous medicine number 4. And look what one tiny spoonful did to that little old brown hen." But Grandma didn't even hear her. Great clouds of steam were already pouring out of her mouth, and she was beginning to whistle. "This is going to be interesting," Mr. Cranky said, still grinning. "Oh, now you've done it," cried Mrs. Cranky, glaring at her husband. "You've cooked the old girl's goose." "I didn't do anything," Mr. Cranky said. "Oh, yes, you did. You told her to drink it." A tremendous hissing sound was coming from above their heads. Steam was shooting out of Grandma's mouth and nose and ears and whistling as it came. "She'll feel better after she's left off a bit of steam," Mr. Cranky said. She's going to blow up," Mrs. Cranky wailed. "Her boiler's going to burst. Stand clear," Mr. Cranky said. George was quite alarmed. He stood up and ran back a few paces. The jets of white steam kept squirting out of the skinny old hag's head, and the whistling was so high and shrill it hurt the ears. "Call the fire department," cried Mrs. Cranky. "Call the police. Man the hoses." "Too late," cried Mr. Cranky, looking pleased. "Grandma," shrieked Mrs. Cranky. "Mother, run to the drinking trough and put your head under the water." But even as she spoke, the whistling suddenly stopped and the steam disappeared. That was when Grandma began to get smaller. She had started off with her head as high as the roof of the house, but now she was coming down fast. "Watch this, George," Mr. Cranky shouted, hopping around the yard and flapping his arms. "Watch what happens when someone's head had 50 spoonfuls instead of 1. Very soon Grandma was back to normal height. "Stop," cried Mrs. Cranky. "That's just right." But she didn't stop. Smaller and smaller she got. Down and down she went. In another half-minute she was no bigger than a bottle of lemonade. "How do you feel, Mother?" asked Mrs. Cranky nervously. Grandma's tiny face still bore the same foul and furious expression it had always had. Her eyes, no bigger now than little keyholes, were blazing with anger. "How do I feel?" she yelled. "How do you think I feel? How would you feel if you'd been a glorious giant a minute ago and suddenly you're a miserable midget?" "She's still going," shouted Mr. Cranky gleefully. "She's still getting smaller." And by golly, she was. Mrs. Cranky made a grab for her. She held her in her hands and cried, "How do I stop her getting smaller still?" You can't, said Mr. Cranky. She's had 50 times the right amount. I must stop her, Mrs. Cranky Rod. I can hardly see her as it is. Catch hold of each end and pull, Mr. Cranky said. By then Grandma was the size of a matchstick and still shrinking fast. A moment later, she was no bigger than a pin. Then a pumpkin seed. Then... Where is she? Cried Mrs. Cranky. I've lost her. Hooray! Said Mr. Cranky. She's gone. She's disappeared completely, cried Mrs. Cranky. Well, that's what happens to you if you're grumpy and bad-tempered, said Mr. Cranky. Great medicine of yours, George. George didn't know what to think. For a few minutes, Mrs. Cranky kept wandering around with a puzzled look on her face, saying, Mother, where are you? Where have you gone? Where have you got to? How can I find you? But she calmed down after lunchtime. She said, Oh, well, I suppose it's all for the best, really. She was a bit of a nuisance around the house, wasn't she? Yes, Mr. Cranky said, she most certainly was. George didn't say a word. He felt quite trembly. He knew something tremendous had taken place that morning. For a few brief moments he had touched with the very tips of his fingers the edge of a magic world. And there you go, that's the end of George's Marvellous Medicine. So now we're going to have a look at task 1. So task 1, we need to work out what types of sentence these are. If there are sentences on task 1 on your sheet, we need to work out if each sentence is a statement, a piece of information, a question, a sentence that asks us something, a command, a sentence that tells us to do something, or an exclamation, a sentence that is written with lots of feeling and excitement. So first of all, we're going to have a quick quiz and see if we can remind ourselves of what statements, questions, commands and exclamations are. We're going to have a look at the differences between them. So get yourself ready. Here comes the first sentence. There's a bear behind you. Is that a statement, a command, a question, or an exclamation? What do you think? Pause the video if you want to and then hit play when you're ready. Well, it's said with a lot of feeling and excitement, isn't it? So it's probably an exclamation. Let's look at the next sentence. The red boat sailed away. What type of sentence do you think this is? Statement, command, question, or exclamation? Well, it's giving us a piece of information. It's not telling us what to do. It's not asking us anything. And it's not saying anything in an exciting way. If it's just giving us a piece of information, it would be a statement. Did you get that? Well done if you did. Question 3. Don't go near the snake. What type of sentence is this? Is it a statement, a piece of information, a command telling us to do something, a question asking for an answer, or an exclamation, something which is said in an exciting way? Well, it could be an exclamation. It is said in an exciting way, but it's telling us not to go near the snake. It's telling us to do something. So that would be a command. Let's try the next sentence. Did you really see an alien? Is that a statement, a command, a question, or an exclamation? Well, it's asking us to do something, isn't it? So I think it must be a question. Don't tell anyone about the map. What type of sentence is this? Is it a statement, a command, a question, or an exclamation? Well, it's telling us not to tell anyone, isn't it? So it's a command. It's being bossy and telling us what to do. So let's have a look at task 1 on the sheet now. What type of sentence? Here it is. Statement, question, command, or exclamation. Well, when George said that in the story, he was very excited. Now, it could be a statement, but because he said it in an exciting way and it has an exclamation mark, we would say that's an exclamation because it's said with a lot of feeling and excitement. Stir it up, George. What kind of sentence would that be? Pause the video, then hit play when you're ready. Okay, he's telling George to do something, isn't he, Mr. Cranky? If he's telling him to do something, what kind of sentence would that be? That's right, it would be a command. So I'm going to put a tick in the command box. Come and watch this one. What do you think? Pause the video and hit play when you're ready. Okay, so he's telling them to do something. If he's telling them to do something, that would be a command. I hope you do better than last time. Tricky one. Pause the video, then hit play when you're ready. Okay, well, he's not telling them to do something. He's not saying it with a lot of feeling. He's not asking anything. He's just saying what he's thinking. He's giving a piece of information. So, actually, that sentence would be a statement. Well done if you've got all of those right so far. Now, have a go at the rest of the questions by yourself. Pause the video, do the rest of task 1, and once you get to task 2, hit play. Okay, so hopefully you've done task 1, which means we can move on to task 2. Choose a conjunction to fill the gap. You can use each conjunction more than once if you want to. And, that, but, while. Come and watch us turning an ordinary chicken into a lovely great big one and lays eggs as large as footballs. I don't think and really works in that sentence. Come and watch us turning an ordinary chicken into a lovely great big one that lays eggs as large as footballs. That sounds good. Come and watch us turning an ordinary chicken into a lovely great big one but lays eggs as large as footballs. No, that doesn't make sense. Come and watch us turning an ordinary chicken into a lovely great big one while lays eggs as large as footballs. What do you think? No, me neither. I don't think that makes sense. I think that fit really well. Let me try it one more time. Come and watch us turning an ordinary chicken into a lovely great big one that lays eggs as large as footballs. I think that fits the best in that sentence. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy that conjunction that into the box. There we go. That. Let's have a look at the next one. She bent down and peered into it. She bent down, that peered into it. She bent down, but peered into it. She bent down while peered into it. Which conjunction do you think fits best? Pause the video, put in your conjunction, then hit play when you're ready. Okay, which one did you choose? She bent down and peered into it? That sounds good. That sounds like it fits. She bent down, that peered into it? No. She bent down, but peered into it? No. She bent down while peered into it? No. I think it's she bent down and peered into it. Well done if you got that one. No, 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 the other two cried, and it was too late. No, 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 the other two cried, that it was too late. No, 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 the other two cried, but it was too late. No, 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 the other two cried, while it was too late. Which one do you think? Pause the video, put your conjunction in, and hit play when you're ready. That one's a bit trickier, but I think I'm going to go for but. No, 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 the other two cried, but it was too late. Yes, but definitely fits the best in that sentence. But. There we go. So see if you can have a go at the rest of task 2 and see if you can fill the gaps with those conjunctions. I can't wait to see how you get on, and I look forward to talking to you again very, very soon. Bye for now.